Toby,
Hello.
how are you?
Pretty good. It's getting to the cold season now, so just adjusting from summer vibes to October feels.
What October feels okay? I was gonna say, what would you like? Vibes turn into what feels?
Because you can't go out as much, so it's mostly like indoor stuff or stuff that like you could stay outside a little bit. It's not the same as just summer vibes is just a whole mood on its own.
Yeah, we got a lot of leaves flowing right now over here, and a blow up dragon that's supposed to be on the front lawn, but has been moved up to right outside my window, which could be fun to blow up at some point. We'll see. I do appreciate Toby. Your crew is already full into our comments, which
They
is
out here.
They are always here and always appreciated. All right. Welcome to Labs Live. This is an exciting one, right, Toby?
Yep, I'm super excited about this one because even beyond like work in general, just scaling a team, growing a product and all that stuff is something that I'm passionate about even outside of work. So excited to talk to Shannon and Chris. This is good. This is
I mean,
good.
you've as a former developer, I mean,
Mhm.
maybe current, but former project developer, right? Like you lived through scaling.
Oh yeah, multiple times. Like we've been on very large automotive projects that have deadlines and where you have to scale and sometimes even reduce size, scale again. I've been through like several like scaling efforts. I've seen some that went really well. I've seen some that didn't go really well. And Shannon and Chris, basically, they've walked the walk when it comes to doing this stuff. So I'm curious to see what their thoughts are in doing that today.
Very much agree. Okay, so before we get into it, make sure if you're on our social channels, follow us, like us. I don't know, bell icon, all those different things to get notified when we upload content. We're constantly pushing out content, and so you want to be there for that. Labs Live is something we do once a month as a LinkedIn event, and we're happy to have you here. Daniel Caspo says you're always a developer to him, Toby.
Oh, love you, Dan.
Not fantastic. All right. Let's move along. As Toby mentioned today, we're talking about scaling a team. The why, the when, the how. It's something that I think oftentimes is inevitable. If you've got a really great high functioning team, there's a desire for it to grow. And so we're going to be talking with Chris and Shannon about how to make that work. So without further ado, let's bring in Shannon Kubenez. She's a delivery lead at Detroit Labs. And I think I'm going to let her explain what a delivery lead does, because I think for a lot of people that might be a new term. So Shannon, welcome. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Fantastic. Toby has moved into fall feels instead of summer vibes.
Team summer over here.
So Shannon, tell us all about a delivery lead and what your role is, what they do.
Sure. It's a pretty unique role. We have delivery leads and not project managers at Detroit Labs. A delivery lead is an agile coach. They wear many hats. So agile coach, really a support team member to the entire development team. So to our QAs or QEs, design, development, we're helping to support all of our team members from various parts of the project lifecycle, from ideation to designs to development, all the way through to shipping a product. So we are we're keeping track of risks and mitigating risks. We're helping to break down work. We're keeping an eye on our progress and tracking towards our deliverable date. A whole bunch of stuff wrapped into one role.
So just a few things, right? Just a couple things you have on top of. It's no big deal.
No big deal.
All right, fantastic. Also, let's introduce Chris Trevarthen, technical program manager. You happen to both be on a same project, so you get to both work closely together. But Chris, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us all about technical program manager.
Technical program manager. That's kind of a role that is newer to Detroit Labs. It's something we didn't have until the particular project Shannon and I are on. We needed to scale. We had, I think at the time, 3 different projects that were going on, all for the same client, but there was a lot of communication that needed to be done across the projects, because it wasn't how we typically would do a project where you might have an Android app and an iOS app. They're the same thing. They're just being developed on different platforms. This was completely different things, but from the same sort of workflow. So it was something that we needed to be able to keep track of how technology decisions were being made, how they were being communicated across teams. And so I stepped into that role to basically sort of play an architect, but also work with delivery leads on making sure that that we were had our workflow set up correctly, that we were organizing releases, that sort of thing. So very much working hand in hand with Shannon on this.
Fantastic. Okay. So let's dive into this. I mentioned something as we were describing scale. I mentioned high functioning team, and I think that's probably a great place to start. At least give us a baseline. What does high functioning team mean?
Well, I think it's interesting that you use the term high functioning, because I don't see that as like the same thing as a high performing team. Because I think you can have a team that ships stuff quickly. They're getting a lot of stuff done, but they're not functioning well as a team. So when I think of a high functioning team, it's not necessarily about the throughput. It's more about how does that team work together. So like for me, one of the main things is having a clear shared purpose on that team.
Yeah. And another thing I think about is trust. We have trust and safety on a high functioning team. We are committed, we're supporting one another. And it's not just about, I trust you to do the work, but I trust that when I fail or when I fall, you've got my back.
I like that. So if you've reached high functioning status, if you will, which obviously is great communication, great trust. So it's a very good foundation, rock solid team. Why on earth would you want to scale from there?
I think that's a great question, because we'll probably, like, you don't always get advantages from that, but the advantages aren't always apparent, but you might want to scale because expectations increase. So if you're adding a whole new piece of a project, say you're adding maybe a new platform, or you're doing a new workflow, or you're just basically expanding the amount of work you need to do, then you might want to scale because of that, because it's just over capacity for what the team currently can put forth.
Or if you're adding a whole nother platform. So, we started off on a web project. We needed to build an iOS app. So the skill set of the team needed to change. So we needed to scale to meet the need of the new product we needed to build.
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I was just going to say, and then along with the workload, team burnout, as you get more workload, team burnout's real. So scaling to help lower that bar for everybody, or that pressure level for everybody on the team, that can definitely be a reason you might want to scale.
So I think we covered a couple of the things here, but I think oftentimes scaling is we equate that to speed. More capacity, faster velocity. But you do touch on one of the other reasons, which is burnout. Are there any other reasons that you would want to scale beyond just expectations increasing and the need for speed? Tobi, it's a video game.
Great game. I think I played it in high school.
Yeah, well,
I think actually right now is a great time to scale. We're all still working in this environment where there's a pandemic happening. And even though we're remote and we're learning to adjust to that it's still underneath everything that we're doing. And so right now, just like given the circumstances that we're living in, right now is a good time to scale if you can invest in your people and you have the room to do that. I think that enough is a reason to scale if you can.
Yeah, and I think talking about like investing in people, having a larger team scale as you grow your team, there's going to be a need for leaders, right? There's going to be a need for people to step up and take on additional responsibilities. Or if you have different skill sets that are needed, you're going to have people that you're going to give an opportunity to people. So scaling a team, one of the great advantages is you get to encourage that sort of leadership on the team and get people who can grow in their careers.
Yeah, and how do you do that? I think that's like a really great point, of just having people like grow into like new positions, maybe team lead and stuff like that, or like people who manage the CI/CD pipeline. Like, how do you create a team, that when it scales, that those opportunities are taken?
I think sometimes that could happen organically.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're bigger. Now this need is bubbling up. Like maybe in the beginning when you're about to scale, you don't really recognize it yet, but along the way, an opportunity arises and an opening presents itself to people to actually like naturally and organically step into a leadership role.
Do you find yourselves encouraging that? Like, I mean, do you see it, the team naturally doing? You mentioned it kind of happens organically, but do you find a part of your role is to also encourage that to take place?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a good point. It's being able to see that, which is one of the great things about the role that I have, where I can see stuff across multiple projects within this particular team, and so I can see where there are people who sort of have that eagerness or that inkling to step up into something like Toby said, the CI/CD pipeline. Somebody starts being interested in that. It's like, okay, well, let's start inviting you to those meetings. Let's start having you take on some of these responsibilities and have, for instance, me take a step back from that. So that's always awesome. All
right, awesome. Now, I think oftentimes when it comes to scaling, there are myths that come with that. I have a couple here, obviously, that I want to talk about. So when you do scale, when that time's come, you say, okay, we're committed to do this. Does that make you instantly faster?
Oh, absolutely. Every time. You're just hit the ground, boom.
Oh, yeah.
Done. Problem solved. No, I think that's a great myth to call out, because you don't immediately get benefits from adding more people to a project. There's onboarding. You have to get people either, if they're brand new to say the company, or to work with that particular client. There's some culture that you need to kind of basically give the background on. And then there's the technology stack. Whatever you're working on, if you're talking about developers or QEs or something like that, you might need to get people familiar with the tools. So I think that that scaling is not automatically going to get you that speed.
Mm-hmm.
So for like when you talk about like getting people familiar with tools, I don't know, I'm asking this question more like high level. So like you have a generic team that is not necessarily even technology. Like what are some things that you think are high level enough that was good when you're like onboarding people to like this new high functioning team?
I think for some high level things, like for instance, I mean, if we're not even talking about technology, is what's the relationship with the client like? How do you, or like, what's the relationship amongst the team if it's your own team that you're scaling? What are the roles? What are the responsibilities? But then from the technology point of view, I think just sort of going into high level, like here's all the pieces of that. So there's the people, how the people interact, but then there's how do the pieces of the application or the architecture interact, and giving someone that sort of that really high level view of here's all the pieces, here's how it goes together, and making that clear, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think that there's different levels. There's one onboarding as it relates to coming onto a new company. And so there's the onboarding not even related to the project or anything, just the company and what to expect from that. And then there's the part of onboarding to a greater team and what that looks like. I think about like, what does somebody need to know? What are the pieces, the dynamics, the key players, the stakeholders, our relationships, some of the dynamics that Chris talked about. And then before you even get into the technology piece, okay, now I have to onboard you onto your individual team that's part of this bigger team. So there's like 3 different levels.
That's awesome.
So I was going to bring up one of the myths on here that I wanted to ask about, because I have found myself taking this approach probably all too often. And Shannon, you've probably corrected me a couple times, but is it just adding people, or at the end of the day, I mean, are you changing complete dynamics within a team?
I mean, I think you are changing complete dynamics on a team. I've been on teams that had as little as 5 people, and the dynamic is completely different. How we communicate with one another, how we problem solve, how we implement solutions is different. There's a lot more autonomy there. When you're on a bigger team, the dynamics are totally different. There's so many communication streams and tools. And so it kind of, you have to change, like, how do we send out information, or how do we provide information? A lot of time spent doing that. On a smaller team, we didn't need to have like a weekly update to keep you updated on what has changed over the past week. Now on a large team with a lot of moving pieces, we have to do that just to keep everyone on the same page. So dynamics are completely different on a larger team versus a smaller one.
So I'll have add one more myth here before we move on, because we kind of introduced it earlier in the conversation. But when you add, so let's say you have a team of 10, and let's say you double that to a team of 20, right? Does that immediately mean burnout is gone? Or is there work that needs to be taken into account to actually manage that in order for burnout to not disappear, but be able to move it a little bit, right?
Yeah, I don't think it goes away immediately. Because I think workload is only one source of burnout. There's a lot of factors that go into it, like having a clear goal, having, actually believing in what you're building, that sort of thing. So I don't think that that just adding people will do it. It takes away some pressure eventually, that pressure of having to be sort of like having all that weight on one particular team or one small group of developers. Now you can share that weight. But I think there are, like Shannon talked about communication, like keeping up with people on the team to see how they're doing. That's really important as you scale the team, to see how the team is feeling and checking in with them.
So who kind of does that? Is that what you do? Is that what the delivery lead does? Is that what a whole team does? How is that check-in? Who kind of owns that?
Yeah, I think on a smaller, even on these individual teams, the delivery lead is a checkpoint for that. I think as the team grows, like, it's hard not to think and care about every single person on the team, even if I'm not working directly with them. I think it becomes a shared responsibility too. And I think that the developers and the other roles also have to look out for one another. And we see that all the time. There's lots of support across all of the roles to keep in and touch, connect with one another, check in with one another.
All right. So we talked about like the why you should scale, right? And when we obviously touched on some of the myths, because I've always found myself being one of those people that probably instantly thought things would be faster and instantly thought that it was just adding people and that would be just fine. So I think it's good to highlight and address those. But knowing that, now we do want to scale, and knowing that, those myths exist, how do you start to set expectations, both with team and then with either client or stakeholder?
Yeah, I think first of all, it comes with setting expectation of timelines. So when are we doing hiring? When are we doing interviewing? That sort of plan around that, because those all take a lot of time to do. So you can't just, one part of, I guess the myth of scaling that we kind of didn't even hit on was that you can scale immediately, right? You might not have the folks to do that. So making that plan clear to stakeholders, and then the follow-up to that is making sure that they understand that there is an onboarding plan and there's an onboarding process. And the more open you can be about that, I think the better understanding is, and maybe can help dispel that myth a little bit of that you're instantly going to get benefit.
So one of the things that keeps coming up, right, is communication. How important is it to be transparent with the team, talking to the team about, okay, these are why, here are the reasons, here are Here are expectations, almost unfiltered from a stakeholder, from a client. How important is transparency in this process?
I think it's huge. You have to give information to the team on what's happening and why it needs to happen, and because they're going to be impacted by it and they're going to play a role in it too. So being open and honest and transparent on the why and when and what it looks like, what does it mean, what are the plans around it, the better off it's going to be, more successful it's going to be.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the concept of the shared purpose. If there's at least an understanding of why is this happening, why is this scaling needed, I think people can buy into it a little bit more than just being told to do that we're increasing the team size.
So obviously, if you're increasing team size, there's essentially two ways to do it. Either you're moving people within a group from one team to another, or what is more likely the case, you're hiring. How do you manage those two work streams, right? You have to do the hiring and the scaling almost at the exact same time.
I will say it's not easy. I will just admit that. Yeah, for the interview process, as we've tried to scale some of the team that we're on, we had to figure out ways to, how do you interview during a pandemic when everything's remote? How do you get people through the process quickly? So how are we able to interview maybe multiple people at the same time? Things like that, I think that takes time from the team too, because the team is working on as is involved in the interviews, as involved as they want to be in the interviews. So that balanced with now, we're trying to figure out who from what team can go where, and so there is a lot of coordination amongst so my role and the delivery leads trying to figure out what makes sense, where can we get people.
And I think the on-site team was a huge part of that in their help, and they brainstormed like a new process to try to get people through the interview process quicker. I think there was already an Labs Lab episode about that, but I think that was really key too. We had support outside of our team to help us with the hiring.
Yeah, you mentioned that. So, we have, just for anyone tuning in, we have a very large team that Shannon and Chris happen to be on. That was a need to scale quite quickly. And with that came the need to both hire and scale at the same time. So you just lived through this, and I should say not lived. You're still living through this, and certainly not an easy thing to do. But having a partner in it, as Shannon mentioned with our on-site team, having a partner is certainly a big help in that. So, all right, we've got folks, we've got a need, we've got folks. Somehow you've been able to divide your time up and also interviewed folks and bring them in. Onboarding. What are some of the top things that you need to take into consideration, or top things to do in order to successfully onboard someone to your project?
I think a checklist, having a list of, boom, here's all the things that somebody needs to have access to, or some information that they need to be aware of. Here's the different systems that they need logins to. Having that and having something that's a repeatable process, I think, is really key.
Yeah, we're lucky that we had a bunch of people coming onto the project all at once, so we could do some group onboarding together. So we had the documentation and checklists, but also just bringing people together and welcoming them to the team and to the project, and just it made it more efficient to be able to just do a group of people and bring them all together and give them some insight.
It's interesting. You mentioned, what's that, Tobes?
No, I was just asking, do you gain, when you do group together, besides efficiency and stuff, have you noticed anything else that you gain from doing group onboarding / doing it one-on-one?
I mean, you answer one question the same, you only have to answer a question one time instead of 10 different times. So you can Yeah, I think, and they're learning from each other too. People are learning from each other. They are at the same stage. So I think it builds camaraderie there with a new group of people.
I gotta say, I don't think I would have thought of it that way. I think I would assume that, you know, bringing somebody on one by one would be the easiest way, but I guess that's a really good point. If everyone's coming on at the same time, it's one conversation and you have a support group right there built in.
Yeah, and it's not, you know, if you have a question, probably someone else has that same question.
Yeah.
So that's based exactly what Shannon said about building that camaraderie.
I love checklists. I've spent a lot of time being told to do a checklist through my early career. Oftentimes not doing them, but realizing that I need them. So I think that's fantastic. Seems so simple, but it does work. What should you avoid?
I have to try to avoid having a perfect plan because it will never be perfect and there will always be improvements to it. That's one thing I would avoid.
Yeah, and I think just relying too much on documentation, just saying, here's the manual, read it, and you're onboarded. There you go. I think there needs to be a much more personal touch.
So I'm going to jump into something here in a minute. And before I do, for anyone tuning in, if you do have questions, we're reading the comments. So I think Chris and Shannon have offered to graciously answer every single question that you have. And if they can't, Tobi will jump in and do it. But by all means, if you have questions, throw them into the chat. We'll bring them up on screen as we continue to move through this. So I want to talk about, as you bring people on and you onboard them, there's something that Shannon, you taught me a while ago, and I think it's interesting because every time you bring it up, I feel like it warrants a explanation, a conversation, and people walk away with a really different perspective of team agreements. Tell me about team agreements, what they are, why you have them, like what that process looks like of going through that.
Sure. Yeah. A team agreement is, I mean, it sounds pretty similar. Like team agreement, it is a written document. Usually we'll do it at the start of a project when a team is coming together to just outline, like, how are we going to work together? We know we have this goal. We're trying to accomplish X for our stakeholders. How are we going to do it? And so we can have an open and honest conversation about how we want to work together. And we put it down in a Google Doc, and it's a living document though. So anytime a new team member joins the team, we should revisit the document and make updates to it or tweaks to it. Or we should evaluate if something isn't working, let's change it up. So it's a living document that should be revisited, but it will outline like the tools that we're going to use, when we're working core hours, what our cadence meetings are going to be, how we're going to communicate, a lot of like interpersonal stuff too, like how do we create a safe environment to work in? How do like a commitment to giving each other feedback? That's really, really hard. But it's one thing at Labs that we try to do is just open and honest communication and open to feedback. So how are we going to give each other feedback? And maybe a little bit about what are your personal goals that you hope to accomplish on this project? So it is a living document, super important. I would encourage everyone to create one if you're on a team. It just gives you kind of the rules or like rules or structure in which you're agreeing to work in.
So where does this kind of document live? Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, the document lives. So typically we'll have it in a shared location that the entire team can get to. So that might be a Google Drive or a SharePoint or something. Depends on the team, the tools that the teams use. But yeah, it's somewhere where everybody can access it.
So correct me if I'm wrong here. So I'm on the team. Let's do a hypothetical situation here. I'm on the team. I communicate to you how I work best. Correct? Like okay, these are I do best in Slack, or I do best in email, or is that one of those things where that's a part of it, but the team agrees that, okay, you may be really good at communication through email, but we really need to keep things in Slack. And so that's great that you have some personal preference. But as a team, we've all agreed that Slack is where the main communication happens. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, I think that on every team, you have to make some compromise. It can't always be what one person wants, but like, all right, you like email better. But what I always go back to, what is good for the project, client, or team, or what's good for the project stakeholder team, and how do we make decisions based on those three things? So it's less about my personal preference and more about what helps the team do the work they need to do, what's going to make the project successful, and what's going to help support our stakeholders.
I think one thing that Shannon did call out though was like, what are your goals for the project? So yeah, Dan, it's the team agreements is sort of like a rule set at its basis for how the team's going to operate. But I think that I like that idea of what is the team. It's not just rules. It's more like, what does the team want to get out of this? What do individual people want? What is their goal for how this can help them individually? How this can help the team by working on this project? And it gets back to that point of like the shared trust, right? So by putting yourself out there and saying, okay, this is what I want out of this, we can. You put yourself out there and you say, okay, this is, help me get to this point, team.
So we do have two questions that came in through the comments. I want to pull up. So Christina, Tobi crew, wants to know what aspects of being a people first company carry over well or are reflected in the onboarding process.
I would say that kind of like what Shannon talked about having onboarding as maybe a group onboarding. So thinking about the onboarding process from how does it benefit the person who's coming on? Not just how does it benefit the team that they're coming on to, that they're an additional person who can help out, but more like what is the experience like for that person? So we do a lot of thinking about that when we comb through documentation and stuff like that. Like, does this make sense to someone who's brand new to this? So I think that coming from the perspective of what does it look like from a new person, I think that kind of shows that people first approach.
I also think if you think about it as what does somebody need to be successful on this project, you're putting that person first. Not, I think Chris, you were saying, not what does a project need, but what does somebody need from us to be successful on this team?
And I think engaged people, right, end up making great team members, which ends up making a great team, ultimately leading to a successful project and successful delivery. So certainly starting with the person, I think is fantastic. Diana asked a question, which I think is really great. If there's a client that is considering scaling a team, but feels something's holding them back from going all in, what would you say to them? Just kind of alleviate some of that early fear.
What's holding you back is probably what I would say. I'd want to dig into that a little bit more.
That certainly does seem like it is ripe for a follow-up question. I think oftentimes people just don't know where to start, and I think when it comes to scaling and when it comes to higher expectations, I think oftentimes we just want to go faster. We just want to get to we want to finish the race quicker. We want to get to the end faster, and oftentimes that leads, but that's often puts blockers on too. How do I start? Where do I go from here? So, all right. Now, let's say you've done everything wonderfully. You have a team that's gone from 10 to 20 to 40 to 100, let's say, hypothetical. Are you done? Does you've scaled up, you're high functioning now, the work is done, team just kind of goes along, or is there ongoing work?
Oh, there's definitely ongoing work. First, I would love to live in that scenario that you just talked about.
The utopia? Everything went really well?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's like with anything, there's the team needs care and maintenance. So, and that comes from checking those check-ins that Shannon mentioned between people on the team. We do retrospectives on the team across the entire the whole team, so we get everybody's perspective, not just one particular project at a time. There's we want to make sure that people on the team are feeling that they have the ability to grow. So once again, looking at those opportunities for people who are stepping up, or opportunities for people to grow, or putting opportunities out there where people can say, yes, I'm interested in that. That's going to keep people happy, I think, feel fulfilled, and keep retention on the team.
Yeah, you did mention retrospectives, and I think like it's not as common as I thought it would be, because when I'm in like regular life, just having conversations like, oh, we did a retro, and like, what is a retro? So what is a retro, Chris?
Well, a retrospective is sort of a look back at some past event or past timeline to see how things went. So at the very simplest, it can be broken down to what went well, what didn't go well, and what do you want to change. So that you can, it's part of like a constant improvement process, right? So if you're not talking about it, if you're not bringing things up, you don't know what you should keep doing, and you don't know maybe what you should stop doing, or what you need to actually change to do better.
That's awesome.
I think on the same note of, okay, you have this large team. Now, what is it? Just smooth sailing? Is it just project work as usual? You have to kind of check in, even outside of the retro process, to kind of evaluate what is working and what isn't working. How are we structured? How do we need to change? How do we need to change communication? Like continuously looking at it and thinking about what improvements we need to make, even outside of a retro where you're bringing everyone together. I think you continuously have to do that.
So I've got to ask on the retro side, and in lines with keeping communication open, fluid, and often. What does that mean now that I kind of don't like asking these questions anymore? Like that now that we're all remote, what does that mean? Or now that we're in the middle of it, like what does that mean? But it's real. So as your team grows and there is a need for more intentional communication, and there's a need for maybe more frequent and honest and open retros, how does that happen without being face-to-face, without, with the computer screen between us?
It does not happen easily. It still does not feel natural. But I think there's, so we talk about these retrospectives, like they're as, those are big events. Those are something we do every sprint. So every 2 weeks, each individual team will have its own retrospective. So, but between then, we've got, I know the delivery leads do check-ins they schedule time to check in one-on-one with people on their team. They check in with stakeholders on the client side, see how are things going. And then things come up as if we have communications issues or something along those lines. We're starting to see things. We might call an impromptu meeting. We might say, you know what, let's if you're available tomorrow, let's take 15 minutes and just talk about this. So and see where people are at. So it is real. It really has to be intentional. It just does not flow, but it's really important.
Sometimes I'll just think, I haven't talked to X person in a long time. Like, I'm going to just check in with them, a quick Slack message or something, because I'm working with less and less of the greater team. So I just try to check in when I can, when they come to mind. Mm-hmm. But I probably need to be more intentional about it too.
I like that, because I feel like it's easier and easier now that, especially with the team grows, but without being face to face, it's easier to kind of pull back and disappear a little bit. Not necessarily from a work standpoint, but from a social standpoint. And being intentional about that communication certainly seems key. And Shannon, you hit on a great thing. We can all do better at that. I'm always finding that I need to check in with people more. That Tobi doesn't need me to check in with them, but
yeah, we do. I think we do a great job, like on our own, just checking in and Slack and text and all that. So that's good.
All right. So as we're going to kind of wrap up here, I always like, if possible, to leave folks with, I don't know, maybe a small piece of advice, whether it be on scaling or whether it be on having, great teams working together or communication. I don't know who wants to go first, but you want to give a small piece of advice or an hour long. It doesn't matter. We can run through it. It's fine.
Shannon.
I think that if you're looking to scale, figuring out the why is huge. Figuring out the how, like the onboarding and what kinds of things can you put together and plan for when you're scaling, but not worrying about everything being perfect. Even our onboarding documentation, we're continuously updating it. I'll say when we have someone join the team, it may not be perfect. You may see things that we've missed. So feedback is welcome. And it's just like it has to be an ongoing process of improvement, getting feedback on it. And so I guess it's a lot of tips for someone, but to figure out why you want to scale and what's holding you back and some steps you can take to move in that direction.
Awesome. Chris, do you have any parting wisdom for folks?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's weird to say this as, part of a business, but, leading with heart, right? Like doing these things out of always keeping in mind empathy, right? How does this affect the team? How does this affect new team members? Empathy with a client or with a stakeholder as well is like, there's pain points there. So trying to keep things on that level, especially as we're disconnected as we are now, like trying to keep it back to that human element, even in business. I think that's where I try to lead from.
What he said. I'd like to change my answer to what he said.
It's interesting you say even in business. Honestly, I think that's the most important time to realize that at the end of the day, we're all humans. We're all doing a job, but it's just that, right? I talk with folks all the time, just putting things into perspective, right? You're dealing with another human being. They have feelings. You have feelings. Being empathetic to those, to another person's feelings, I think is paramount when it comes to team makeup. And at the end of the day, everything's just a project, just a job, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a great way to look at it. All right, Tobi, any other words for Chris and Shannon before I let them go?
Yeah, thank you so much. I really just appreciate even just the last words of wisdom you just shared. Like with Shannon, I think that's one thing I personally, as a human being, like always struggle with. You want to make it perfect, and just coming to terms with like it's not going to be perfect. And with Chris saying like leading with heart, I just feel like both pathing, like if that is what I take away from this conversation we've had for the past 45 minutes, that it in itself is a whole life lesson. So thank you both for like taking the time to share your wisdom. I appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Chris, Shannon, I'm going to move you backstage. You can hang out there until we're done with the stream. We'll talk after. Thank you so much for taking the time talking to us today, talking about how to scale the people element, setting expectations. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Mm-hmm.
Tobi, that was fantastic, wasn't it?
That was like it like hits all the good parts. It's like you're talking about scaling, but then ultimately just comes back to you just working with people. And this is not a plug for labs, but like this is one of the things I love the most. This is like business is ultimately about people, about relationships and empathy and all those things. And that is more important than anything else. And like, yeah, it just gave me the feels. It was really good.
We always talk about being a people first company, and certainly when the first pass at that is our team members, but it's bigger than that because we're working with clients, we're working with stakeholders. There's a human connection, there's a human element there, right?
Yeah.
They have expectations that they need to deliver to, and it's important to show empathy with them as well, right? We all have bosses somewhere, right?
Yep.
And so there's always expectations somewhere. Sometimes they're realistic, sometimes they're not. And I think just taking into consideration that everyone is playing a role, but at the end of the day, they're people. We're a people first company because we want to show empathy for one another, both from our team members, our clients, stakeholders. And I really think that is a great thing that anybody in business can do. I like that Chris said, even in business. And I think that it's like, maybe the most important place to do it is in business. So that was fantastic. Again, thank you to Shannon and Chris talking about scaling, the why, the when, the how, what are things to do and what are things to avoid. I think it was fantastic. Don't forget to go to our social channels. This will be available afterwards. You also see snippets throughout the next coming weeks. I don't know. We have another episode scheduled in November at some, I don't know the date off the top of my head, Tobi, which I really should get better at that. But I do believe we're going to be talking about apprenticeships. So
nice.
Fantastic. I think November is like apprenticeship month, or there's a week or something along those lines. So we're going to be talking about those, which are going to be great. So you're going to want to, bookmark us. It's not even bookmark, is it? It's like follow,
bookmark.
Did I show my age there, Tobi? All right, we're going to wrap
a little bit.
That's it for Labs Live. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in.
And we'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.